Imagine you just finished reading an entire book, 280 pages. You highlighted sentences, you dog-eared chapters, you even told someone about it at dinner the next day. And then, 3 weeks later, someone asks you a simple question about what you read, and you pause. You search. You reach for the ideas, and slowly, uncomfortably, you realize you can barely remember the shape of it, the argument, the through line, the point. Now here's what most people do in that moment. They blame their memory. They say, I just forget things easily. Or they blame the book. It wasn't that practical. Maybe they blame time itself. It's been a few weeks. But what if none of those things were true? What if the real problem, the one nobody talks about, is that you were never truly thinking in the first place? Illusion versus reality. There's a particular kind of trap the human mind falls into, and B.F. Skinner spent decades watching it happen in laboratories, in classrooms, in life. He called it behavioral reinforcement, but what he was really documenting was this. We repeat what feels rewarding, even when it produces no real result. Highlighting a sentence feels like understanding it. Nodding along to a lecture feels like absorbing it. Rereading your notes feels like learning. But feeling and becoming are two entirely different neurological events. Sigmund Freud would add something darker to this. He'd say the ego, that psychological structure we build to protect our sense of self, has a profound investment in appearing intelligent, not in being intelligent, in appearing it, because appearing intelligent is safe. It requires no risk. It demands no vulnerability. You can highlight every sentence in a book and walk away feeling smart without ever having challenged a single assumption you already held. This is what psychologists now call fluency illusion, the feeling of familiarity that the brain misreads as understanding. When something sounds familiar, the mind whispers, I know this. But familiarity is not comprehension. Recognition is not recall. And recall is not the same as being able to use an idea when the world demands it. The world's most effective thinkers learned, often through painful experience, to tell the difference. Logical tension. Here is something nobody told you in school. Confusion is not a sign that you're doing it wrong. Confusion is a sign that your brain is being asked to grow beyond the boundary of what it already knows. But the ego doesn't like that. Freud was precise about this. The ego wants coherence. It wants a tidy, consistent self-narrative. And when learning genuinely disrupts that narrative, when a new idea doesn't fit, when a mistake reveals a gap you didn't know existed, the ego reacts. It gets defensive. It gets dismissive. Sometimes it gets angry. Think about the last time someone corrected you on something you thought you understood. Really sit with that memory. There was probably a flash of heat, a small, quiet resistance. Maybe you immediately started forming a counterargument before they even finished their sentence. That resistance, that's not weakness, that's not stupidity. That is the ego doing exactly what it was built to do. The question the smartest people learn to ask is not, how do I avoid that feeling? Because you can't. The question is, what is this discomfort trying to show me? Because every moment of genuine confusion is a map. It marks the exact territory your understanding hasn't colonized yet. And that's not something to run from. That is the most valuable information your mind can give you. Core concept teaching, the Feynman principle. Let me give you a mental model, a simple one. Richard Feynman, physicist, Nobel laureate, one of the most electric minds of the 20th century, had a rule. It was almost embarrassingly simple, which is maybe why it works so well. If you can't explain something in plain language to a child, without jargon, without hedging, without borrowing authority from credentials or complexity, then you don't understand it. You only recognize it. This isn't about dumbing things down. This is about earning an idea. Think of it this way. Imagine a concept is a building. Most people learn the address of the building. They can point to it on a map, they've driven past it, they've even photographed it, but they've never been inside. The Feynman method forces you inside. You have to walk through every room. You have to explain where the kitchen is. You have to describe the staircase, the light, the layout. And the moment you reach a room you can't describe, a gap in the explanation, a sentence that only sounds like knowledge, that's the room you have to rebuild. Skinner would have loved this, actually, because what it creates is an honest feedback loop. You try to explain, you fail to explain cleanly. That failure itself is the signal. You go back, you learn differently, you try again. Not punishment, not shame, just data. The brain, treated this way, becomes something more than a storage device. It becomes an instrument of genuine inquiry. And there is a profound difference between those two things.
Now here's where it gets interesting and personal. Because most conversations about intelligence stop at technique. They say use spaced repetition, apply active recall, practice retrieval. And those things are real. They're supported by decades of cognitive science. But the smartest people in history weren't just following better study techniques. They had a different relationship with being wrong. Einstein was wrong, spectacularly publicly wrong about quantum mechanics for decades. Darwin agonized over the implications of his own theory. Feynman famously wrote, "I don't know," on his chalkboard as a starting point, not as a failure state. What unified them wasn't genius in the Hollywood sense, the lone, effortless savant struck by lightning inspiration. What unified them was a particular identity. They saw themselves fundamentally as people who don't yet understand enough, not as people who needed to protect what they already knew, as people perpetually on the edge of not knowing and who found that edge interesting rather than threatening. This is what intellectual humility actually means at its deepest level, not false modesty, not the performance of uncertainty, but a genuine, practiced, almost devotional orientation toward the unknown. And here's the paradox at the heart of it. The moment you need to seem smart, the moment your ego requires others to believe in your intelligence, you stop being able to grow it. Because growth requires admitting the gap, and admitting the gap requires trusting that your identity doesn't depend on the gap not existing. Ask yourself, honestly, is your relationship with learning about expanding who you are or about confirming who you already believe yourself to be? That's not a rhetorical question. That's the question everything else rests on. When you genuinely internalize this, when it moves from concept to lived orientation, something strange happens to the way you see problems. Problems stop feeling like tests. They start feeling like conversations. Uncertainty stops feeling like threat. It starts feeling like texture. I think about what Freud understood about the unconscious, that vast, pressurized interior world beneath our conscious awareness, and I think about how much of our intellectual life is running on the same hidden rails. We walk into a classroom, into a book, into a conversation, carrying all of our prior conclusions already formed. We're not really seeking new understanding. We're seeking confirmation for what we've already decided is true. And the whole architecture of ego-driven learning is designed to let us do exactly that, comfortably, indefinitely, without ever really noticing. But when you start practicing the kind of honest self-examination that genuine learning demands, when you start using confusion as a compass rather than a verdict, something shifts in how you interact with the world. You become more creative, not because creativity is some mystical gift, but because creativity requires the same thing learning does, the willingness to sit with an unresolved question long enough for a genuinely new answer to emerge. Most people leave too early. They accept the first explanation that sounds reasonable, the first solution that feels familiar. The people we call geniuses, and I'd argue this word is almost always misleading, are often simply people who stayed in the room longer, who were comfortable enough with not knowing that they didn't rush toward a premature answer. And that's not a talent, that's a practice. It's a habit forged over time through exactly the kind of uncomfortable, ego-bruising process we've been describing, which means it's available to you, not as an idea, as a discipline. I want to leave you with something, not a strategy, not a 5-step system, just an image. Imagine two people standing at the edge of a forest. The first person has a map. It's detailed, impressive, landmarks labeled, paths marked in confident ink. They walk in knowing where they're going, and they find exactly what the map told them was there. The second person has no map, or rather, they hold their map loosely, knowing it was drawn by someone else in a different season, under different conditions. They walk in with the map as a starting suggestion, not a final authority. And because of that, they notice things. Paths the map didn't account for, clearings that shouldn't exist, strange, beautiful anomalies. They get lost sometimes, they double back, they sit down in the middle of the forest and simply look. And when they come out on the other side, they're carrying something the first person isn't. Not just a destination reached, but a richer, truer understanding of the territory itself. Skinner would say you reinforce what you practice, and Freud would say you protect what you fear to lose. So the real question, the one I'll leave you sitting with, is this. Which thing are you more afraid of losing? The belief that you already understand, or the curiosity that could show you how much more there is? Because one of those is a ceiling, and the other one is a door.